talking about your life, and that had to have been very difficult to go from, I mean, being a twin is hard enough.
Yeah.
I'm not a twin, but just having been around a lot of twins in my life. And then to have your dad have such a big shadow, and then your brother was a baller.
Yeah.
And then to have that shift for you, how did that transition to go from, I mean, how did God lead you from basketball to really Old Testament in the prophet Isaiah? That's a big transition.
Yeah. Great question. So when I transferred there to Bethel College, I honestly, I had like a 0.8 GPA my final semester of my sophomore year, first semester of my sophomore year at Pacific, and that's just a reflection of not going to class and everything. And so I was barely eligible to play. And so the coaches are like, what major can we put this guy in that he's going to stay eligible? So they put me in the easiest major on campus, which I won't say what it is, just in case anybody out there would be offended. And, but they also, part of their general ed requirement was you had to take a Bible class, intro to the Bible or intro to Old Testament, intro to New Testament. So here I am, like trying to grow as a disciple. And I thought, hey, I've always heard I should read the Bible. I'm reading, so I'm going to start reading it on my own. And I got a mentor to kind of help me with that, another student, and then started taking classes on the Bible. And I'm like, man, this is just so great to be growing in my faith and learning to read scriptures. And then pretty soon I started taking more classes, and eventually my major shifted to where I could kind of have a Bible concentration for a more general liberal studies major. And what was going on during that time, I couldn't have articulated it initially, but what I began to see gradually was that I was really benefiting from the Old Testament, while I noticed all my friends were like reading the Gospel of John and James, or reading James or Philippians. And I began, as I was going to churches, realizing, man, the Old Testament rarely is being preached on. And here I was loving the Old Testament. And so I thought to myself, and pretty quickly felt a call to ministry of God's word. By the time my junior year was finishing, that was pretty clear. I wouldn't have said I was going to be a professor, that's for sure. And that love for the Old Testament, that love for meeting God there, I think was planted during that time. And I took a Hebrew class. I could only take one semester in my senior year of college, and I just loved it. For some reason, all the squiggly lines, reading right to left, and all the weirdness of it was just so appealing, in part because it was God's word. Then when I went to seminary, that love for the Old Testament continued. And when I was a youth pastor for 3 years after seminary, I would kind of be preaching through books of the Bible, and I'd be doing a lot of Old Testament stuff with my students, and seeing the Lord bless that. And
I can just see you in youth group. Hey, everybody, turn to Leviticus 1.
Yeah, we're going to start here. Let's
talk about the purification laws.
Yes, exactly. Well, let's talk about those, right?
Burnt offerings.
Yeah,
come on.
I did a whole in hindsight, it's like, wow, I was really ambitious. I spent a whole year preaching every Sunday morning. It was a large youth group, so you kind of had to do like small group stuff Wednesday nights, but Sunday mornings was like more like a service. So preaching, I think I called it God's redemptive story. And I was going to work through the whole Bible and kind of just take the kind of key moments, key passages all along the way. But what it turned into, we never got to the New Testament. It was just, we were really laying that foundation in the Old Testament
This is in the youth group?
High school youth group. And I even gave him a test at the end. I don't know what. So
what I mean, like you gave them a test, but my question is what happens if they failed it? Like, sorry, you don't get out of
Sorry, you don't get to
you're
move
here
on.
forever.
So I have these 150 students, coming in, and I'm just, but I think that what that did is I began to see, wow, this is actually nourishing God's people. I actually had to, really enjoyed it. But there's a professor at Trinity, a guy named Dr. Van Gemeren, who I had just really looked up to. I'm like, man, if I could, I was a good student and I thought, man, maybe I could do a PhD someday. I don't know. And then I said, but if I ever do, I want to end up being like Van Gemeren. And then Van Gemeren said, why don't you come study and do a PhD here with me sometime? And I'm like, man, well, if now or never. I wasn't married yet by the time I was 27, and thought this may be a good time to do a PhD in Old Testament. So I did it, and again, didn't know if I'd go back into church ministry or if I'd teach overseas as a missionary or what, but really sense more than anything a calling to devote myself to studying the Old Testament so that I could serve God's people and help this part of the Bible that God's given us be recovered for the good of the church. So so that's kind of my mission, where that Old Testament focus grew out of.